Okay. But I'm excited to have him, and he's excited to share this, this information. So Dr. Grover.
Thanks. I guess we're official now. So we're recording, but thanks for having me. And thanks for everybody for coming and spending your lunch break with me. So I have a lot of information, and if I skip some or go really fast through some of the slides, forgive me. Just don't have the time to cover it all. But yeah, thanks for being here. Just briefly, a little bit about me. I like to know who is presenting when I'm hearing topics. But I'm originally from California, born and raised there. So another Californian implanted to the state of Utah, but hopefully with targeting some needs here in the community for especially mental health. I'm married to a beautiful wife. She's a pediatric oncology nurse, and we have 3 little boys. And I've been with Provo Canyon Behavioral Hospital now for nearly a year. Last July is when I started. So we love it here. Really happy to be here. So some of the learning objectives for this conversation is to become a little bit familiar with the demographic information about youth and adult use of digital media, and understand some of the risks associated with those with digital media. And this will range from just generic screen time, social media, video games, yeah, all of the above. We're going to talk about benefits too. It's not all just doom and gloom associated with digital media. There's absolutely good things about it. And then we're going to discuss some approaches to overcoming some of the obstacles with digital media, and tips as far as where we go from here, and how do we ourselves utilize social media or digital media to our benefit. Some disclosures: there's no financial relationships with anything talked about here. I do want to say that this presentation is not to screen shame anyone or give parental criticisms. I'm certainly guilty of throwing an iPad in front of my kids to help calm them down sometimes. So we all do it. And although a lot of the data and discussion that we're going to have is geared, a lot of the research has been done towards teens and children and screen time, I think it's still very applicable to all of us. So some of the demographics I thought would be helpful to discuss is just understanding how many people in the world are using it. So right now, according last year, in 2021, there's been 4.9 billion internet users. That's a 10% jump from a couple of years previously. You kind of see that that number just increasing dramatically, especially if we go down to social media users at 4.62 billion. That's 58% of the population is using social media, and that's up 25% from 2019. So that's a huge jump. Interesting facts: 500,000 tweets and Snapchat photos are shared every minute. There's 4.5 billion Facebook likes per day. It's just astronomical, the amount of information that is being shared and distributed in the world today. Best estimates of the world population is 8 billion right now. So why are we having this conversation? Why should we talk about digital media? Well, screens are changing the way we communicate with each other. You can communicate with anyone, anywhere, anytime, as we're doing here. We're having less face-to-face interactions. We're sending pictures, videos. However, there's more risk for disinhibited and risky online behavior associated with that. And certainly cyberbullying, sexting, things like that is an issue, which we'll go into a little bit later. And of course, jobs are searching applicants on social media now to kind of learn some information about them. We're going to get a little biological here, just briefly, talking about young brains and their development. So there's two really main important areas that are being developed in adolescents, children, really into early adulthood. And these are the, first off, the frontal lobes, the prefrontal cortex. These can be overwhelmed. And this is associated with executive functioning. We see that young kids, they have poor impulse control, empathy, judgment, because their frontal lobes aren't fully developed yet. And affecting the frontal lobe early really causes downstream effects when later on when their brain is fully developed and can no longer easily make those connections. And then second most important area about the young brain is the dopamine system, particularly the mesolimbic system. So this is the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens. And just really quick, I don't want to get too deep into it, but this is the reward center of the brains, and they communicate with each other in a way to make us feel good, but also warn us about dangers. So there's definitely benefits of both ways to protect us, but also to reward us in this area of the brain. And what these areas do is they send these neurons back and forth to each other, this communication in a positive feedback loop, kind of like a child suckling on a new mother. That action causes a release of hormones, which then produce more lactation, and then more and more lactation is had, and that's a positive feedback loop. So the same thing with this area of the brain and the dopamine and kind of regulation there. It also connects to other areas of the brain like the amygdala and the hippocampus that helps with memory and forming those memories of the reward. The problem is what we see in addiction is later on is a down regulation. Initially, going back to the positive feedback loop, initially it kind of upregulates. It causes more neurons to be formed in that area of the brain because there's more, there needs to be more receptors for the hormones to act on and the neurotransmitters. So later on, though, with downregulation, it desensitizes the receptor after repeated stimuli. So then it makes it unresponsive to that same stimuli, requiring more and more of it. And that's what we see with addiction, why sometimes you need more and more of the same stimulus to get the same effect. So that's all the biology that we're going into today. So there we go. Moving on to where technology is going. Obviously, it's not slowing down anytime soon. Every day it's getting, the world is getting more technologically advanced. There's great benefits and also some risks associated with it. We'll go into that a little bit more. So all digital media may be addictive. Children and teenagers shown to spend 6 to 11 hours daily on digital media. And then they spend sometimes 90% of free time on screen media activities rather than physical activities. What's interesting, if y'all may remember, in 2018 there were some Silicon Valley executives that admitted smartphones, games, social media were all designed to be purposely addictive, based on personalized algorithms that they use. And they talked about not allowing their children to get personal phones or social media until kind of late teenage years. Kind kind of talked about society and the issues there, less face-to-face conversations with each other, and that goes for family as well. Dinner table isn't looking the same anymore. Everybody's on their phones. And then of course, personal time. It's caused issues with self-esteem, these concepts of FOMO, this fear of missing out, addictive behavior. Certainly privacy is changed. I know when I recall when I needed privacy on the phone, we had a corded phone hooked up to the kitchen wall, and I had to walk outside around the corner and close the sliding door and talk to my girlfriend out there. And that was all the privacy we can get. So obviously it's a lot different nowadays. I went from that to cordless phones to the cell phones and whatever else we have, watches. Let's see. So we'll just move on here. We'll just first touch on screens, phones, social media, and video games in general. Then we'll talk about risks and benefits of all of these things. So popularity of screens. It's interesting that studies are showing that kids are starting younger as far as having a screen in front of them. The age of having a regular personal screen exposed to them in 2005 was 4 years old. In 2012 was 4 months old. 92% of 1-year-olds had used a mobile device by 2016. Sorry, these are a few years old. I'm sure those numbers are up now. And then more than half of 4-year-olds had a TV in their bedroom or their own tablet or device. Teens are sending 30 to 100 text messages for at least an hour daily. We're seeing a little bit difference in gender as far as digital media use. Boys are twice as likely to have to be playing video games and having that sort of screen time over females who are using more text messaging, social media. Again, smartphones are becoming more popular. Kids are getting smartphones at younger ages. 20% of 13 to 14-year-olds got smartphones in those years. 10 to 12-year-olds, 45% of them got them when they were between those 2 years. As we see, by the year of 2018, 95% of 14 to 17-year-old kids had smartphones, compared to 2012, which was 37%. So quite a bit difference there. And then what's interesting is, on average, we Americans, we check our phones 344 times per day. That's once every 4 minutes. Interesting to just kind of realize how often we're all doing it. So what is social media? And I'm sorry, a lot of these slides are a little bit wordy, but we all know what social media is. Basically, places where we create a character. And I say a character because sometimes it really is a character. It's not personalized who we are. We kind of glorify areas of our lives and not show the bad. I wouldn't say the bad parts, the tough, the real life struggles that we all have. And so in a way, it is a character. And there's different forms to do this, different mediums. And of course, each medium has its own things that we kind of, you can like it on Facebook, or you can share it or love it on Instagram, things like that. On average, social media users are now spending 2.5 hours each day on social platforms. And 75% of teenagers have at least one social media profile. Now going on to video games, there's a lot of different forms of video games. I didn't know what all those acronyms were So here's a few of them. We'll touch base on a little bit more of like person shooter games. So popularity of internet games is obviously going up as well. Worldwide, 700 million people regularly play online video games. And 1 in 7 boys are playing 4 to 10 hours a day. There is one study showed, it was interesting, higher prevalence in Asian countries, particularly in South Korea and China. South Korea had up to 50% of adolescents meeting criteria for internet gaming disorder, and 24% of those required hospitalization for the severity of it. So it's causing a real issue in some people. And so why are these video games so successful? Well, it gives not only teenagers, even adults, a place where they can make choices, receive accomplishments, move on to the next step or level. It's a place to interact with peers anywhere in the world. I met people that, talk about their friends being online, they've never met, but they're located elsewhere parts of the country or even in a different country, and say, that's their support. They're really connected to this individual. There's emerging technologies that cause some forms of addiction, like virtual reality. A few years ago, there was that popular Pokemon Go. That was this augmented reality, actually allowing people to physically go somewhere to collect Pokemon. So they're very clever in how they're delivering video games to all of us. So like I said, there's risks and benefits to everything, especially with digital media. So let's talk about some of the positives of it. Right now, there is no rigorous large-scale randomized trials that have determined whether digital media is causing harm. There was a review of 36 studies between those years of 2002 and 2017 that showed the following from teenage use. They reported increasing well-being, increase in social connections, sharing intimacy with one another, whether that be platonic or intimate, displaying affection and arranging meetings, activities. There's more collaboration. Again, using homework assignments together via online, peer encouragement. There's team sports. Those who are socially anxious and feeling a little bit awkward, those reported from ethnic minorities or LGBTQ, they reported that they received more benefit from social relationships mediated through online platforms. And then nearly a third of teens use internet to learn about health-related information. And 90% of teenagers with mental illness sought help online due to the anonymous nature of it. So as far as mental health is concerned, it's becoming, or it is the number one first line go-to that people are using for help. What was interesting during the COVID pandemic was the extent of digital media, and looking at high school graduates. And the United States, we recorded a record number of 85% of high school seniors graduating in 2021. We can possibly look at education being accessible via technology as a culprit to that. And then certainly training for future jobs. Kids are very, very intelligent when it comes to technology. I have to ask my kids all the time, how do I use this? And so they're becoming more skillful in that regard, and they're ahead of others if they have those technology skills. And many successful people are no longer going through the traditional route of college education. Some of the positives of video games. They experience success. They experience cooperation with other people. They connect with people who have the similar interests, improve coordination, visual spatial skills, and really a small minority of, sorry, really a small minority of those playing video games develop like an internet gaming disorder or any sort of mental health issues. It's only reported as about 1 to 2%. Some of the other positives of social media, teens and kids, they report that they feel connected to friends. 83% of teens say social media makes them feel more connected. And it helps them to identify or establish their own identity in a safer place. As I mentioned before, marginalized groups are finding belonging. Again, they learn about health, not only mental health, but physical health. And then it's interesting, activity level might actually increase, which is something that we don't know yet. Some data is suggesting that because it often leads to plans offline. If they're making plans with their friends on social media, then they'll meet up and get together. Still need more studies and data to support that. So let's talk about some of the risks of digital media. First, physically. There's a risk of more sedentary behavior. There's repetitive use injuries, which cause things like carpal tunnel, arthritis, neck, back pain, disrupted brain function, as we talked about earlier on the biology aspect of it. Motor vehicle accidents obviously is very, very significant, associated with using phones, things while driving. Nearly half of adults admitted to using or texting while they're driving. Likely it's probably a lot higher than that. There's eye and vision problems that can develop, sexual dysfunction, and a huge negative aspect or effect on sleep. Only 50% of teenagers are getting enough sleep per night. We know that blue light reduces melatonin, which then causes insomnia. Phones may be waking people up with nighttime notifications. There's increased cortisol if sleeping even just near a device, which we want low cortisol to sleep through the night. And of course, if we're watching exciting media right before bed, our cortisol is going up, our adrenaline's going up, and that's going to affect our sleep. So as far as sedentary behavior, less physical activity and less exercise. I mentioned that sometimes with teenagers, some things are showing that they're getting maybe more active, but in general, especially with adults, I think more commonly that it leads to less physical activity, more obesity, cardiovascular disease. And then other brain changes with high screen use. Something was, or they called it electronic screen syndrome. Even if you don't believe you're addicted or the kids are addicted, kids especially, they can appear impulsive, moody, struggle to pay attention. They're used to instant gratification rather than delayed. We kind of live now in a high dopamine world where we get this instant reward, instant gratification, and that's what a lot of the media is doing for us. We get overstimulated on the frontal lobes, again, causing some attention difficulties, signs of ADHD, decreased executive functioning. Other ways that digital media can be mentally hazardous. So can't quite see all my screen here. So Dr. Twenge is a psychology professor at San Diego State University. She has about over 150 publications, many of which are studies about digital media, social media, and its effects on depression and anxiety. In 2010, roughly 8% of 13 to 17-year-olds were diagnosed with depression, but in 2017, that jumped to 13%, more than a 50% increase. The study showed that 13% of kids who use social media every day reported higher levels of depressive symptoms than those who use social media less frequently. There was this large national survey of eighth graders, 10th graders, 12th graders, and what they looked for was correlations between happiness and screen versus non-screen activities. And what they found was for all non-screen activities, the correlation was positive. However, for the screen activities, it was negative, and the most unhappiest group were the teens who used screens more than 20 hours per week. And their adolescents' well-being decreased the more hours a week they spent on their screens, whether that be any sort of platform that they're using screen time. So they asked, what made those the happiest. Positive effects were sports and exercise, in-person social interactions, religious services, printed media, surprisingly, and homework. What they did was, they found satisfaction in accomplishing tasks there. Negative effects were reading news online, TV, video chatting, texting, social media, computer games, and internet. And see that all of those is technology, digital media. They found that those who spent 20 or more hours were the least happy, and if they used it 3 hours or more per day, it showed a 34% greater chance of suicide related risk factors compared to the rest. Those who didn't use social media or digital media at all were less happy, but those who used it very rarely, 1 to 5 hours per week, were the most happy. So there's obviously some benefit to using some digital media. So I'm gonna try to skip ahead a little bit so we can get through a lot of this information. So a lot of this is redundant. Some of the reasons why it affects self-esteem and depression is that they compare themselves to others. They have body image issues, as seeing pages of people who are better looking or more fit. They realize how much they may be missing. So FOMO, again, fear of missing out, missing connections with their friends. Back in the day, if there was a party that I wasn't invited to, I may or may not have ever heard about it, didn't know what I was missing. Nowadays, it's much more, everything's posted, pictures are posted, so everybody knows what they're missing. Again, kind of less face-to-face time, I've already talked about. the risks of social media and suicidality and self-harm is quite substantial. On YouTube, there's thousands and thousands of violent, inappropriate videos targeted towards children and teens. There was a report of there was an energetic cartoon character that would appeal to children, except 4 minutes into the video, a man appeared in the frame and demonstrated how to cut your wrists. So there's a lot of just terrible things like that that can be accessed, not even purposefully, but children watching cartoons can be exposed to this. I did a quick search on my Instagram and I typed in self-harm, and this is what came up. And I mean, this was just the surface of it, but you can see that there's a lot of different pages that promote self-harm, promote suicide. Yeah, so there's a lot of bad things to that. Studies found that children who self-harm were 17 times more likely to go on to commit suicide compared to children who did not. And so to find that there's such support for self-harming behavior on the internet is quite disturbing. I'm sure you're all very aware of this Netflix episode of 13 Reasons Why, and that was aired in 2017. Google searches after this was released showed positive awareness, but also some concerning themes. So it gave, it allowed us to talk about suicide a little bit more, but it also increased in Google searches of, how to commit suicide. So it's, there's goods and bads to it. Increased searches and suicide hotlines and how to prevent suicide, but also how to commit it. Adolescent suicide is a leading cause of death in young people, which is second to accidents. Right now, there's really no study that has shown social media to be a cause of suicide. Again, it can just be a place we know of that kids are kind of exposed to suicidal imagery, but also a place that they can seek help from, as I mentioned before. There's definitely needs to be future studies looking at social media as a risk factor. So that brings us to cyberbullying, sexting, and violence. Cyberbullying is a really big issue right now. It affects 15 to 20% of high school students. Those with females, those with disabilities, LGBTQ, obese, they're more likely to be cyberbullied than other kids. There's shaming. There's what was described as cyberbullyicide. Unfortunately, this teenager, Amanda, she committed suicide from online bullying. That was in the news and widely talked about. Different kinds of cyberbullying may include posting abusive messages, threats, pictures, sharing them. There's cyber stalking. People are creating fake websites, fake names, catfishing, and many bullies are often using the veil of the internet because it's easy to do so. It's not as in your face or awkward as being bullied in person. Revenge porn is a big issue associated with digital media as well. We'll just kind of skip through this for time, but and also sexting, very much on the rise. Basically, here it is, 25% of teens dating reported that they met their partner through digital media, and much of the evidence on the internet and support are saying that, well, it's kind of part of normal development nowadays as far as sexting. It's their sexual development. However, it just opens the door to a lot of potential for abuse. They find it a lot easier to, sext multiple peoples at once rather than going on one date at a time. I want to touch base on online violence. Digital media will just, whether that be the news, video games, live streams on social media, can be very violent. You can see videos of terrorism, police shootings, sexual violence, videos of suicides. And what's interesting, they noted by 18 years old, a child will have watched thousands of murders and hundreds of thousands of acts of violence through all these different through all these different medias. Whether that be, real life violence or in a video game. The American Academy of Pediatrics in 2016 came out with a statement. They said video games should not use human or other living targets or award points for killing, because this teaches children to associate pleasure and success with their ability to cause pain and suffering to others. I'm just kind of breezing through this now, but and I don't have the time to give this the discussion it needs, but just briefly, back in 1999 when Columbine shooting happened, it was widely talked about that the shooters were used this video game Doom. It's a first-person shooter. They were actively, playing this video game, and so that caused members of Congress and the House, the president, to talk about, that there needs to be research being looking into digital media and violence. Later on, after Sandy Hook, the same thing happened with Hillary Clinton campaigned. President Obama asked Congress to fund research. So ultimately, is there a correlation between video games and violence? There's really no such studies or research that has demonstrated that to be true. I think there's too many confounding issues associated with violence that it would be very difficult to narrow down that they are directly related to video games. However, at the same time, I think we're desensitizing ourselves to such violence by making it just like an everyday thing. So what do we do from here? We got to find the right balance in digital media. It's not going anywhere. Like I mentioned earlier, technology is getting more and more advanced. It's becoming an everyday part of our life. So we need to find a way to use it to its benefit and try to avoid the risks of using it too much. So what we should do with our youth, find everything we could, find out what our youth is doing online. Talk about basic internet education, such as, words, photos, videos on internet and how they can be manipulated. Such as the example of YouTube, watching a fairly, not very risky cartoon then ends up turning into, someone cutting their wrists and exposing kids to that. We got to negotiate new rules with rewards for good behavior for children and adolescents. And when they're exposed to something, purposefully or non-purposefully, we got to be loving and supportive of them and educate them in a way that would, that they will actually listen and not kind of go against with what we're trying to teach. We need to ask them and talk about things that are difficult, such as violence, bullying, sexting, all those things that are just so rampant today. We got to protect ourselves from fraud. And of course, discussing the age at which we feel comfortable giving our children and adolescents access to phones and all other digital media resources. Sometimes there may be a need for taking away phones, like I mentioned, addressing sexually inappropriate behaviors and offering them on online resources. So our pyramid, earlier in the slide, there was a pyramid with the base of having Wi-Fi. That was the most important function. I tell you, I've seen a lot of adolescents come to the hospital with suicidal ideations because they report that their parents turned off the Wi-Fi or they took their phone away. And that's how important it is to them. And it's really sad and disturbing that that's how much they rely on their phones or Wi-Fi for other needs. So it needs to change. We need our foundation should be family, friends. We need good sleep. We need to do well in our activities, school, work, and then media should be really the top of that pyramid. And we got to be proactive and prepare our children. Again, a lot of this is kind of redundant. Video games, especially, got to know what they're playing. There's ratings on all the video games, just like movies. And my son just came. My 9-year-old has been begging us for Fortnite for a number of years, and all his friends and cousins are playing with it. So, we had that discussion between him and my wife, and kind of came to a conclusion of what we can do to allow him to use it and have fun, but at the same time do it in a safe and productive way. There's got to be protective times for media. So I think I'm going to end there. All of this stuff is I think we've talked about most of it. Yeah, there we go. So I appreciate you all attending and hearing me out. Hopefully it was beneficial, and love to answer any questions you may have.
There's a lot of information out there, and a lot of you guys have heard some of this, and some of it's repeat, and we wish we could say there was one answer to everything, but like Dr. Grover says, kids come in and each kid's different, and what's going on in their lives and how to address it, all that is different. But comments, questions? No comments, no questions? Anybody awake out there?
I think I'm putting to sleep.
I had a
Question?
I had a comment. This is one is, or it's a comment / question is, do you know of any good resources or any sort of treatment that is specifically designed to help young people think about, or just people think about their use of digital media And then I also wanted to kind of put a plug in that we here at Elements Wilderness are using something called the 7 Challenges, that it was originally a substance abuse counseling model that we've been working with the 7 Challenges people to kind of modify. And it's really a decision-making model to help, just to help people think about, especially specifically young people, about how they're using digital media. And I don't know if there's anything else out there that people are using. I'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, absolutely. A quick search, I came up with a couple things here on this last slide. One from the APA, American Psychological Association, and the use of technology with children. ACAP, also that little link there. There was a site I found against cyberbullying, specifically CyberSmile. So all of, yeah, there's a lot of different resources. Again, this was kind of a quick search of what might be out there. There is another movement called, it's one of these slides. I think it's the 8th. Parents coming together and trying to wait until 8th grade to allow their children to have access to phones. Again, I mean, that's, if that works for you, that's great. If not, I mean, it really has to be a decision between, each individual family and their specific needs. Again, I'm not wanting to criticize or comment on anybody's parenting or anything like that, but that's one thing that a lot of people are really trying to actively participate in. So I appreciate that comment. Oh, sorry.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I was just curious, when you were talking about one of the first slides about the biology of the brain, is there a growing or a reduction in size of, like the nucleus accumbens, for example? I think you hit on that one. The brain itself, does it undergo any sort of change as it's being met with a lot of screen time, or how is it that the brain is trying to combat all of the addictive natures of all of the, whether it's social media or video games? What does the brain do to combat that? Or is it, I guess I don't really know my exact question, but I was just wondering if there was some sort of a change within the brain.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the question. Certainly changes are occurring in the brain. And back to this positive, where'd it go? Positive feedback loop. So what it does initially is it upregulates and it brings more receptors into that area of the brain to allow, dopamine to bind to those receptors, allow the transmission signaling to occur. And what that does is over time, that chronic high dopamine to those receptors desensitizes those and makes them unresponsive to the dopamine. So you're not getting that same feel-good reward with the same amount of stimulus in that area. So that's one way that it's changing brains. Again, they're just, especially in the young adolescent child to early adulthood brain, it's not quite fully developed. So we're making those neural connections, and if something goes wonky early on, then we're really going to have issues down line as far as attention, any sort of executive functioning like that. Yeah, more disinhibition behaviors.
Thank you.
Let me squeeze just for a second. I just put in the chat. We're going to do the password for the class is going to be tech614, and the link is there. If this doesn't work, if this link doesn't work for you, we're finding a lot of firewalls are blocking that. Let me know, email me, and I will send it to you, and we can try accessing it through a different computer and stuff. Like I said before, here at the hospital, our firewall that blocks us from Google Forms. So I have to access this at home, and it works just fine. But let me know. For you that are on phones, again, just email me and I will send you this link. Don't apologize for that. Everyone apologizes. Sorry, I was on my phone, or the link didn't work. Can you send it again? It's no problem. We understand that. But yeah, if that's working, you can jump on, fill out the form. So the state requires us to do an evaluation when we're live. We usually hand this to you in the class because we're doing this online. We have it online. So there's the evaluation. There's the code word. So we can prove to the state that you stayed through the whole process and listened to the whole thing, because we did it at the end. And then, yes, I will email you your certificate after you filled out the evaluation. And that's how you'll get the certificate, is afterwards. It doesn't automatically send it to you. What I do is I wait for everybody to fill it out, and then I send you an email, and just give me a few days, let everybody kind of fill that out. So we can stay on here for a second. I know some have to leave, but if you I know there was a few questions. I'm trying to get back here a little bit. Jenny, Tammy, yeah, we'll try to cover this topic a little bit more. It's kind of tough. You got to cover the basics, and then we can get more into it. There's new information coming out all the time. But yes, we'll talk about this some more. Who else? Did anybody else have any questions?
I think there was one, let's see.
I was gonna say, Rhonda said, you mentioned video game dysphoria. What's the criteria to be diagnosed?
Now, I don't recall if that is I don't believe that's technically in the DSM as of yet. That's kind of one of those diagnoses that are becoming utilized because we're seeing it being it affecting the mental health so drastically. So there's a lot of diagnoses that aren't technically, DSM. So I can't really give you much more information about the specific criteria. Really, what I would base it on is if somebody is coming in with significant depression or anxiety and it's directly related to the video game use, if they're having withdrawals from the video game use, if it's affecting their everyday life, as far as not engaging in responsibilities in school or home or any other thing, because they're using that time to video game. And those would be the criteria that I'd be looking for. Kenny had a question about the effect of sexual dysfunction. Is that correlated directly with adolescents or even adults engaging in pornography? So I would say both, for a couple different reasons. So let me touch on digital media in general, not just using it as far as with pornography. The drastic effect that it has on insomnia is directly correlated with libido. And so I think that's the number one factor of all screen use affecting our sleep, chronic fatigue, that leading to low libido and sexual dysfunction. As far as the reward pathway, the dopaminergic reward that we get through pornography, then I would think, sorry, let me gather my thoughts here. You're used to a high dopamine, again, when engaging in pornography, a high dopamine reward that leads to that desensitization of those those neurons. And so again, kind of going back to that biology, you become unresponsive to the same stimuli. And that's how I believe, the use of pornography would cause sexual dysfunction in that way. Sorry, hopefully that made sense. I think that's all the questions I see. Is there anything else?
Did everyone have a chance to jump on? Was the link working for you? As you're reading that one, we want to thank everybody for coming and joining us. I'll send you out when our next one is. We will send, I will send a copy of the slides with the certificate as well as recording. So if you want to go back and look and watch later a little bit. I thought I saw another question there.
It was me. I was just wondering if you could send the references for the papers that he referred to or the studies.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll go and put everything through in a reference section.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hello,
Yep, you're on.
I do have a question. My name is Cindy Law. I have changed employment places and I don't want to lose connection with your classes that you have on here. How can I verify and make sure I get notification of these classes that you hold?
Just send me an email and I'll update your contact information in our system.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Love these classes.
Good. Glad you're enjoying them.
All right. Well, thanks for having me, and hopefully this was informative.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you next time.